The scene here in Berlin today, torrential rains, no, a heat wave. Instead of spraying back protesters, Berlin police were out in force hosing down the great unwashed. One lady said it was better than a shower. Tourists in Rome were also in for a treat with civil protection teams spraying mist from pickup trucks. Red alerts have been issued and more records could be broken as the extreme heat moves eastwards across the continent. I stayed indoors all day, except when I had to come into work. The concrete slabs of the city radiating what felt like a giant oven into my face. Look at the deep red on this heat map of Europe. Some places were above 40 degrees Celsius. There are warnings in place for some 200 million people. So what does a heat wave do to our bodies? How do we get through one? And how should we prepare for the next one? Because there are going to be more and more of them, according to the experts. One expert is Jeff Goodell, a climate journalist and author of the New York bestseller, The Heat Will Kill You First. The book is about redefining our understanding of heat and the risks and dangers of heat. Jeff, what's the hottest place on Earth you've reported from?
The hottest place on earth I've reported from, probably somewhere close to where I live, which is in Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, places like that.
How hot does it get there?
Well, it gets around like even today, right now, it's about 38. It gets to be 41, 42, something like that. 43. I think the hottest I've ever experienced is 117 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure exactly what that translates to.
I can't do the math on the fly, but tell me, what happens to the body, typical body temperatures around 36, 37 degrees? What happens when the temperature around us rises above that and rises as high as places like Death Valley and where you're from?
Well, I mean, everyone knows, I think, everyone knows when they go to the doctor, the first thing the doctor does is take your temperature, right? That's a very strong indicator of how your body is doing it. And everyone knows that just a rise of 1 degree or so has real implications for your body. Our bodies are very, very sensitive to heat. And in a heat wave, what starts to happen is, literally our bodies start heating up, and we only really have one mechanism for cooling, which is our hearts start pounding faster and faster, pushes blood out towards our skin. We sweat, the sweat dissipates the heat and cools us off. What happens is if that mechanism can't cool off fast enough and the temperature outside is hotter than your body can deal with, then your heart starts pumping faster and faster. Your whole cardiovascular system is stressed. That's where you get into heat stroke range. If you have any kind of cardiovascular weaknesses, risks of heart attacks, and then it just gets sort of uglier from then on. If you're exposed to extreme heat for any period of time, literally the cellular membranes in your body begin to basically melt, and you ultimately kind of melt from the inside.
Oh, it sounds pretty horrible. I mean, I've had heat stroke a couple times.
It's not pretty.
And it was horrible. But tell me, what are the most dangerous heat-related symptoms then to watch out for?
Well, the first thing is dizziness, feeling your heart pounding, a sense of disorientation, rapid sweating, and then even worse if you stop sweating. That's a real danger sign. It's the basic sense of your body your body tells you, it begins to essentially, kind of freak out. You feel your heart pounding, you feel the sweat, you feel the dizziness. And what's really urgent, the most important thing to know is that you have to get to a cool spot. There's no other solution. Some people think that that it's like a temperature, and then if they take aspirin, that will fix it. Aspirin doesn't help in heat-related symptoms. You have to get to a cool room, shade, feet in a cold water tub, a cold shower, stick your head next to an air conditioner, whatever. The urgent thing is getting to a cool spot and getting your body temperature down.
Are there any other things that people think they should be doing? Like, I mean, should you be drinking warm water instead of cold water during a heat wave, or is that going to make it worse?
Warm water or cold water doesn't matter. Continuing to drink is really important because, as I said, our body's only mechanism for cooling off is basically sweat. And so if you get dehydrated, your body is less efficient at sweating. But one point that's really important that most people don't understand is that drinking water itself doesn't cool you off. It doesn't cool your body down. All it does is allow you to sweat. So drinking water is a sort of indirect cooling mechanism, not a direct cooling mechanism.
Okay, this next graphic I want to show you from the World Health Organization shows every year almost 500,000 people die from heat-related causes worldwide, and more than a third of those are here in Europe, 175,000. Jeff, how does heat actually kill?
Well, first of all, I want to say that those estimates are probably gross underestimates because it's very difficult to, unlike, say, a gunshot wound, if you're shot by a gun and everyone knows that's what killed you, you have a hole in your body. With heat deaths, it's not clear. There's no sort of signature of it. So many of them just look like heart attacks and things like that. So I think it's widely viewed among scientists who look at this that these numbers are an understatement. But the way that your body, the way you die from heat is that usually it's a cardiovascular collapse. Your heart just basically gives out. If it doesn't, you get into this sort of cellular melting thing where your kidney cells in your kidneys can begin to go, and it begins this sort of cascading event inside your body.
Now, in France, just now dozens have died, young and old, at least 40 drowned in the past week. Are these drownings that we hear reported often during these heat waves, is that due to the shock to the body from the change of temperature, the sudden change?
No, well, I don't know, obviously, in detail what the precise situations were in these, but in general, no. It's usually people who are desperate to get in the water, and so because they're very hot, and they take risks to jump in places where they perhaps shouldn't, or that they're not good swimmers or something like that. It's not usually, in most cases that I'm aware of, any kind of a sort of body shock thing.
And why so many deaths specifically in Europe?
Well, because you don't have what I feel blowing on my head right here in Texas right now, which is air conditioning. There's not as much air conditioning is the simplest answer, right? The problem, the difficulty that in Europe faces is that it is built for a climate that no longer exists, right? I mean, Europe is poorly adapted for a hot world. Unlike, say, Texas, where I live, has its own kind of miseries, but people here, I think the air conditioning penetration here is 95% or something like that. People understand what to do in the heat. There's a cultural knowledge about it. Europe does not have a cultural knowledge about it. People don't know, do I open the windows? Do I close the windows? Do I put shades up? Do I put shades down? Do I drink water? Do I not drink water? All these kinds of things that help you survive through a heat wave, which we in Texas kind of understand, most Europeans do not. In the same way that in Texas here, when it snows, people just drive off the road immediately and smash into each other. They have no idea how to drive on snowy roads because it never snows, similar to extreme heat events in Europe. So, and the buildings are poorly adapted with ventilation, less air conditioning. All of this contributes to the much higher risks in Europe.
Yeah, let's bring up those figures on air conditioning units. In the US, it's around 90% of households. In Europe, it's only around 20%. And within Europe, there's a divide. In southern countries like Italy and Spain, it's up to 50%. To the north, in Germany, it's around 19%. And most of those are portable units. Well, we're just looking at those figures. Can you tell me, is that itself, these portable units, is that an environmental no-go in installing such units and not having permanent ones?
Well, I mean, they can be less efficient. I think for these extreme heat events, it's important to say that air conditioning are life-saving devices. It's really important. They are a way to kind of get through these hot spells, which are going to increase. So I would never argue against air conditioning. It's a really important technology. It needs to be cheaper. It needs to be more widely distributed. It needs to be fed by renewable power so it doesn't increase CO2 emissions. However, it is not the full solution. There's also different ways of thinking about designing cities, designing houses so that they're not, so that they're better insulated, so they're not facing the sun in ways that heat them up. There's a whole suite of thinking about how we build our world that goes far beyond air conditioning. Air conditioning is not a simple fix for all this, as important as it may be.
What about heat pumps, which can also be used for cooling?
Yeah, they're great. I mean, air conditioners basically are heat pumps, and they're fantastic. They're efficient. They're great technology. I have one in my house. They're terrific. There's no, they're the sort of technology of the future for this. But essentially, air conditioners are heat pumps.
And what about nature-based solutions, de-sealing surfaces, so more green spaces in cities, more native trees for shade, green facades, more water in cities, so streams, fountains, wetlands?
All that's hugely important. The built infrastructure that we live in is really important because no matter how big of an advocate of air conditioning you are, a lot of people are not going to have it. So having spaces where you can get out of the heat for people who don't have air conditioning, having public cooling centers in many hot cities in the United States, and increasingly places that are pretty far advanced in thinking about heat in Europe, like Paris. I would say Paris has got the most sophisticated kind of heat plan. They have a lot of sort of public cooling centers where you can go and get out of the heat. That kind of thing is really important. And also, really important, a lot of these deaths are related to outdoor workers and finding ways to give relief to outdoor workers, including, taking time off in the middle of the day, essentially siestas in the middle of the day, is really important also. So air conditioning is just the beginning of a conversation, not the end.
Jeff, as far as getting through a heat wave, let's listen to what some Germans do.
I carry a fan round and I try to drink a lot and avoid staying in the flat during the day because it's like a sauna in there.
Just lazing around in the shade.
I wrap a wet towel around my neck to make it more comfortable, and I don't leave the house before 6 p.m.
Anything else you recommend?
No, those are all good things. I think that everyone has to figure out kind of what works for them, and I think the key thing is sort of getting educated about it so that you do understand the risks. There's lots of places you can go online to learn about that. You could read my book. You could. A lot of cities have sort of heat hotlines that will inform you more about this. I think that understanding the solutions that work for you is what's really key.
And I guess also taking it seriously. I mean, I wanted to go to the gym today, but I was told, nah, you're staying home.
Whoever told you that's a smart person who loves you.
Now, a lot of people are also worried about their pets, of course. Do you have advice there?
Well, pets, the thing about heat is that it's sort of democratic for all living things. I mean, every creature, including, trees and flowers, everything is vulnerable to extreme heat. And dogs and cats and pets are no different. And so being thoughtful about them. I mean, one of the things that I see here in Texas a lot and in hot parts of the Southwest in the United States are little booties for dogs, because one of the things that we forget, because we're walking around, most of us with shoes on, but try taking your shoes off today and walk on the sidewalk on a really hot day, and you'll see how insanely hot the concrete gets. So thinking about that with animals, giving them breaks, when a dog is panting heavily, getting them out of the heat, also into shade, into an air-conditioned space, basically the same kind of common sense rules that we would apply to ourselves, we should apply to our pets also.
And is there anything else that governments need to include in public heatwave action plans?
Well, I mean, there's a whole suite of things about education, about heat awareness and things like that. But it's really important to say that the reason these heat waves are getting hotter and will continue to get hotter is because we are putting more and more CO2 into the atmosphere. This is a creation of burning fossil fuels. There was a study by a very well-known European scientific organization called World Weather Attribution that basically said that this heat wave that you've been experiencing in Europe the last few days is virtually impossible, would be virtually impossible without the additional CO2 in the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. So I think we have to look at the big picture also, not just the sort of individual survival things, but thinking about the world we're creating that is making these heat waves possible.
Well, I just want to share one more graphic with you from the EU's climate monitoring service, Copernicus. It shows how far above or below average land temperatures in Europe have been since 1860. But check out the trajectory from 1980 onwards, reaching almost 2.5 degrees above average. Jeff, what if that trend continues?
Well, then we are going to have a lot of dead people and a lot of melted roads and railroads and, airplane runways. And, you're just beginning to see this week in Europe, how it's not, obviously our first thought is with humans and surviving it, but, we're also thinking about the sort of melting of infrastructure, and all the risks associated with that, from the cooling waters for nuclear plants. It's really hard to overstate the risks of extreme heat. We talk about air conditioning and how important that is, and it is important. But one of the things about that is, if you have a world that's built on air conditioning, and we should have more of it, as I've argued, but if you have a blackout during a heat wave, when the grid is strained, and all of a sudden you have 3 days where all the air conditioning shuts down. You were talking about a mass casualty event. There have been estimates I've seen in a city like Phoenix of 150,000 people dying within 4 days.
Wow. Another thing that you bring up in your book was that civilization was built for a stable temperature zone that existed over the last 10,000 years. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, it's this idea that I actually got from scientists who study life on other planets, is this idea of a Goldilocks zone. That, when scientists look for life through their telescopes, they're looking for the presence of liquid water. In other words, planets that aren't too cold so that the water is ice, or too hot that it's all vaporized. Humans and civilization as we know it has evolved in this very stable niche. And we are not adapted too much outside of that niche. And what is happening now with that graph that you're showing, and as that graph continues, if we continue pushing the climate system that way, is we're moving out of that Goldilocks zone. And once we do that, the implications of that are very profound, not just for, your safety and the safety of your mother and grandmother and children, but for every living thing and for basically civilized life as we know it. So heat is a very deadly and predatory force.
Let's just bring up that graph once more for the folks to see. And just tell me, Jeff, are public health systems prepared for what's coming our way?
Absolutely not. There's no question that they are not prepared for it. I've spent some time at hospitals dealing with heat here in the United States, and even in educated places, they're not prepared for it. They don't really understand the full implications of it. They're not prepared with cooling centers. They themselves are vulnerable to problems with heat with some of their machinery and things at hospitals. When you think about, especially when I mentioned the scenario of a blackout during a heat wave, which even for Europe, right, for Berlin right now, if there were a blackout, in the middle of this heat wave, it would be catastrophic for tens of thousands of people. So no one has thought about this enough. The amount of, when I started reporting my book 8 years ago, virtually no one took any of this seriously. There's been a lot of uptake in recent years as a result of some of these extreme heat waves that we've had. The 2003 heat wave in Europe was, killed 15,000 people just in France. That was a big wake-up call and made a lot of people start thinking about it. And we've had a sequence of these extreme heat waves and mass large death counts that have helped push awareness, but we still have a long way to go, and the risks are growing exponentially along with that curve.
Well, it's good we're talking about it tonight. Jeff Goodell, great to have you on DW.
Thank you.
And how do you deal with the heat? Let us know. I'm Ben Fazul, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.